we run into situations where things don't work as smoothly as they should, or things conflict a lot, right? So, um, one of those economic goals that we had talked about was efficiency. One of the things you run into is the more government you have, the more issues you run into, right? Now, a dictatorship is slightly different because you basically just do what you want to do. But the more, regardless, the more government you create, the more inefficient we get, right? So if I was to have like Tyler in charge of something and he was just doing it on his own, that'd be one thing. But then I said, okay, Tyler, if you need some help, go ahead and hire a couple people. And he hires two or three of you guys to help him. Well, now he has to deal with two or three of you guys. Now, if two or three of you guys are doing well, but one of you guys is kind of excelling, and Tyler's like, okay, I have got to go run this. So you go ahead and run these guys here. And if you need to hire some more people, go ahead and hire some more people. And so one of you guys takes that and runs with it, and you start to, and then you decide to hire someone else to operate, and you have subcontractors and subcontractors and subcontractors. It just gets more and more and more and more. Um, what's the old too many chiefs, not enough Indians, right? Too many hands in the pot, right? So you start to get issues that come up like that. Um, One of the ones that I still we are currently dealing with it right now is the smoking law, which you guys have lived throughout your own whole life has been in that world. But I was around before it existed. And regarding bureaucracy, one of the things that we have with the smoking ban is anybody going to a different state that doesn't have the smoking ban, and you're like, why are they smoking inside? Every once in a while, all the people I'm with are like, why? It's illegal. And they're like, no, in Ohio it's illegal, not in Pennsylvania, not in Michigan, or wherever. So one of the things, does anybody have a home-based business, like something that's out of your house? Mom or dad runs a business out of your house. Okay, so one of the things that Mr. Schiaffini, when we read through it, he and I were laughing because one of the things he said, wow, this law has teeth. It was very, very specific in regards to distances from the building. You couldn't be near any type of intake. So if you were by a window, you had to be 40 feet away from the window so no smoke came in. If you were near a vent is considered intake. Even if it was like what they were saying, anything that potentially like pushes air out, if it's not on, potentially air can get in. So you can't be by those. If you have a home-based business, if it is let's say you're a tax person, you do taxes at your house. If someone comes to your home, you cannot smoke in your own home for the fear of secondhand smoke. So there's all sorts of more laws and more rules. If I owned a bar and one of you guys came in and was smoking, and someone reported it, this is kind of a fun one. Has anybody ever looked at the non-smoking or the no smoking signs? What's on the no smoking sign along with the no smoking sign? What's that? Well, there's a cigarette, yes. There should be something below it or somewhere on the sign as well. It's a phone number. You're allowed to make a phone call. You can anonymously also say you don't have to give your name. You can just anonymously report to the business. Right, so they don't have to follow up on who it was. Just an anonymous phone call told us that someone was smoking in your building, and I can come and I can cite you guys. The police could cite me and give me a warning, and then the second time cite me again, and the third one they can shut me down if I allow people to smoke. Right, so there's more and more and more laws. So you run into sometimes that with the more government. Freedoms tend to disappear. You don't tend to have as many. They start to get a little bit more muddy in the water, right? So you have to like kind of what was the one I was thinking of yesterday with the gasoline prices? Who in here knows what the rules are for driving at the age of 16? How many people are you allowed to have in your car?
One person that's family, one person that's not.
One person family, one person not. And then if you have 17 or 18, you're allowed to have more. No, same thing, right? Now, what about coming to school? Are there exceptions for going to school or not going to school? So again, you start to add all these different things in there, and it gets confusing. So you look at your freedom sometimes is again muddied in the water. I'm not sure exactly where I can go, what's allowed, what's not allowed. The more government we have. So I know I'm talking about the United States, but if you think about it, we have a lot of commands, a lot of rules that we still have to follow. Sometimes annoying. Like you guys heard one this morning, right? Sitting in the vehicle, no sitting in the vehicle, get that vehicle, come inside. There's reasons behind that, but regardless, right? Economic growth tends to slow down a lot. You'll see it, but it's government run, right? So we look at Soviet Union during the Cold War, Cuba. Who in here knows what the last U.S. vehicle in Cuba is? Like what year we allowed? So if you go down to Cuba, you'd see this year vehicles in Cuba. Let's see if I can find it. In 1960. So if you go down there, you'll find a whole bunch of 1960s vehicles, right? Who in here saw Fast and Furious, the one where they're in Cuba and he's got the car, they're doing the drag racing, right? If you look at the vehicles, they're all modified, they're all old parts, old pieces. You kind of put them together and add new stuff to it. So you tend to see a slowdown in some form, some instances. Now this one, I'm not sure I have in theory economic equity. Um, the gentleman I mentioned to you guys about the watermelons, where he was able to get a watermelon when they were delivered. He said, in that sense, yes, we were all equal. Everyone was given exactly, or you had the same opportunity to be equal. So incomes were relatively the same, depending on your status. So if you were a doctor, of course, you got paid more, but all the doctors were paid pretty much the same. If you were a janitor, all janitors got paid pretty much the same. So it was equal depending on the field. There was no, so in some senses, I mean, if we're looking at the disparity between sexes that we talk about in the U.S., there would have not been that in that system. So there's a positive there. Um, the problem that he was telling me was the government became your elite, right? So the government officials were the ones that were getting all these perks and bonuses. So it wasn't the industry owners anymore; it was the government. So if you look at like China's a good example of this. If you go to China and you look at the government officials, doctors and lawyers that are taken care of by the government, very well taken care of. But if you're not in that upper echelon, then you're basically, you'll get what you need to get and you'll be taken care of at the bare minimum. All right. One of the things that kind of a decent example of what you might see in regards to economic equity was where they live. So you talk about a ghetto. We talk about these. We talk about if you look at all of these apartment buildings, right, they're almost identical. This one's a different color, same basic concept, although this one has like a small little porch on the outside. But this was very, very common. You would typically see this more than you would see actual homes being built. Right? So, 2 bedrooms, great, or two kids. Here's your apartment. Three kids. Here's your same apartment. Get a bunk bed. Right? 4 kids. All right, we'll give you one more room. Right? So, all right. Now we're going to jump over to mixed economic systems. So again, where do we really live in a mixed system? Right? Every system has different variations. We have a little bit of traditional. Right? So you might see certain things in church. You might see certain things in family traditions. So here's one that I'm experiencing um, in regards to family traditions. So I have for years and years and years and years and years and years, and this is not meant to be a sad statement. It's just the way it's been. I'm single, and Thanksgiving was always really, really easy for me. I would just go to my parents' house. That was fine. Well, now I'm dating someone, and Thanksgiving was a whole little fiasco for us because there was an argument between who we went to and how long we stayed. Right. So if we look at traditions, right, there's there's a struggle involved. I was just talking to Dave, the a guy that's working for the school for uh, custodian, and super nice guy. But he was talking about his wife, and he was from Fort Myers, Florida, and he moved up here to be with her and her family up in Maple Heights, and then um, now he wants to move back to Fort Myers. And there's all sorts of little things that we were just talking about, but it was just, again, traditional things that we wanted. She wanted to be up here for her family. Well, now her mom's passed away, so he's like, okay, now it's time to go back down to Fort Myers. So we have things that we do for family, for friends, that we tend to look at traditional. Centrally planned, um, you look at this as limitations, right? So one of the things in Ohio still is the marijuana. That would be one if we're looking at centrally planned situations. Speaking of that, they have already started talking at the federal level for legalizing marijuana in certain portions. So again, if they do allow it, the federal level, it's kind of an interesting little side note. Um, any of those places like in Nevada or Colorado, Oregon, Washington D.C., all those states that have legalized it, you cannot get a federal loan because it's still federally illegal, right? So you can get a state loan from one of the state banks, but they can't get it from a federal bank. So if it's a federally funded bank, nope, not so much. And then free market. Now, this is where we were talking about Smith was all about self interest and the market and letting it do what it's supposed to do. But there was also a limitation. He thought, listen, I can't have it completely free because there's issues with that, right? So, in regards to schools, I want people to have at least a basic knowledge, right? So, at least some knowledge. So, it used to be what, eighth grade was as long as you had to go to school. Keeping in mind, some of the education back then was a lot more stringent then. Roads, how we build them, some of those different aspects, health hazards, drugs. Think about, well, I don't know, there'd be an argument for this one, but health hazards, think about COVID, had we not had any of those shutdowns or regulations. I'm curious to see what would have happened, right? Child labor laws. This is actually an interesting one. And I have a couple pictures behind you guys on the left and the right of those posters. Those are all child labor issues, except for the top left. That's just dinner, but a really basic dinner. Um, but again, they used to, because kids were smaller, let's use them for factory stuff, right? I can't get in the machine and we need to tighten that bolt down. So, Stewie, come here. Yes, I use Stewie. I need you to go in there and tighten that down. Here's a little wrench. Just watch out. Once you tighten that bolt down, the machine's going to start back up because there's no safety mechanisms in place. So when you're crawling back out, be careful of the moving parts. So how many kids were killed in machinery, right? Lost fingers, lost legs because the kids fit. There was actually a couple things I read. There was one where like the coal mines, and I think the top right over there, I believe that's a coal mine where all the kids are kind of like sitting in there. They would use the kids to they would drill as far as they could with the tools, and they would send the kids in with the dynamite and have them actually set it up and then crawl back out. So imagine how many accidents there were with kids. This kind of reminds me of Groot from Guardians of the Galaxy 2 when he's like, "Don't press this button. I am Groot." No, not that one. So I think of with the little kids back then, right? So child labor laws, I think that's relatively smart thing that we had, right? So um, now this is actually one of the things when I was grading the vocab, I kept on coming across this. A lot of people with the word laissez-faire kept on getting rid of the word generally. They were just saying government shouldn't intervene in the marketplace, which isn't true. Laissez-faire essentially, well, not essentially, laissez-faire is generally you need to stay out of my way. For the most part, stay out of my way. Let me do it. It kind of goes along with the invisible hand theory, right? We can figure this out. You don't have to tell me how to do this. Right? However, there are times when we might need the government to step in. It's kind of like when you witness someone doing something stupid on the road, and you're like, "Where's the cop? Oh, where are they? Wish they were here. They should have seen that. Can't believe they missed that." Right? Unless it's you that did it, and then you're like, "Oh, good. There's no cop." Whew. Right? So generally, we want in a mixed system the laissez-faire idea. Generally, stay out of my way. Okay, you guys good? Got it. All right. A few roles that we do want the government involved in, right? Provide national defense. There is an argument, and I hear it all the time, and it's relatively valid if you think about it. Woodrow Wilson was along the same lines. I'm not sure if Roosevelt was. No, not Roosevelt. I know Woodrow Wilson was. It's called isolationism. Trump was actually kind of on the road to this in a way. in a sense of why are we doing what we're doing all over the world? Why are we not just staying within our own country, putting the military around our borders, and just protecting the people inside our country? Like Hawaii, yeah, we'll help them out, and Alaska, of course, yes, we'll help them out. But why are we so involved elsewhere? We should just be providing our national safety. Um, Public education. So this is something I talk about every single year with regard to this specific one. I don't want to live in a dumb society. I want to have relative intelligence, right? So, um, one of the things I always think about with high school is kind of like your survey years. It's kind of like where you like who in here is really like loves, or I should say loves, really likes English and really enjoys that kind of thought process, the writing. Who in here is a math person that really enjoys the analytical, the finite, right? How about science? What are my science people? Okay. How about my history or government economics people? Okay. Right. So you tend to look at that, and Raven happens like all of them. So that's great. That's good. Um, but the thing about this is it kind of points you in a different direction. So by the time you guys are seniors, in your brain, you've kind of gone, okay, kind of like this realm. I think I'm going to kind of go down this path. You guys made it even more specific by going to your vocational fields, right? So I really like criminal justice or public safety, so I'm going to go that route even more specific, right? I really like working with vehicles. I'm really going to go down that road. So public education is just it's a survey. It's kind of like okay, where do we want to go? Um, Basic ideology. Private property protected. Imagine living in a world without private property. Would you ever be able to leave your house? Would you ever be able to leave your car? I would avoid leaving my house. All right, think about the parking lot at the end of the day. If there was no private property, what could you guys do at the end of the day? I'll just take whatever car I want. I like that Tesla. As long as it's charged, I'll take it. Oh, I like that Mustang. I'll take that one. Oh, I like that truck. I'll take that one. There's no private property. So we have that. So it's nice to have that. Fair exchange in the marketplace. Who in here has ever heard of Martha Stewart? Right. So if you guys remember, she was in jail a couple years back for that lovely. All for those who aren't aware, basically it's called insider trading. So she just had a friend who owned a company that was on the stock market, and all she did was she found out from him that whatever that was going on with their company wasn't good, and so he had told her, "Listen, our stocks are going to drop really quickly here in the next day or so. Sell your stocks, get rid of them, and that way you're not going to lose the millions of dollars that you've invested with us." Go ahead. Yeah. So that's and insider trading. So she was able to sell all of her stocks, and everyone else I didn't know. So let's say I bought all the stocks that she sold, and then a day or two later the stocks dropped and plummeted. That's not fair. So that was why she actually ended up going to jail for wasn't even that long, was it? It's like 5 months, 6 months. Yeah, it wasn't that bad at all. Um, all right, and then of course taxes. Sadly, what's that phrase? There's only two things that are for death and taxes. There are only two things guaranteed in life. It's very, very cynical, but death and taxes. I was telling my girlfriend this. She's like, "No, that's not true." I was like, "Yeah." She's like, "You don't have to pay taxes." I was like, "Did you buy yourself a coffee today?" And she's like, "Yeah." I was like, "Guess what was added into the coffee? Taxes." "Did you get gasoline today?" "Yeah." There was taxes in the gasoline. So there's a lot of them now. A couple of questions to ask. Are you guys willing to pay taxes to fund the army? I'm just curious. Yeah, right. We want that protection. That kind of goes back to that um, national defense. Willing to give money to unemployed?
No.
Okay, nothing at all.
No.
Zero. What if it's not their fault?
There's
Doesn't matter,
hundreds
they
of
can get a
thousands of
job.
jobs out there. It's definitely their fault,
Yeah.
especially where the market is right now.
Hmm. Who in here is okay with paying for unemployment a little bit? Okay. All right. Here's a follow up. You want to give all people an education. Okay, because that's the big, huge discussion now. We're looking at um, paying for college. There's a discussion over like community schools, community colleges. That's talked about pre-K. That's another one, like your preschool stuff. How much are we willing to give up in order to get? How much money are you willing to pay in taxes to get those things? Right? This becomes the hard part, right? Because you guys are all feeling it in your wallet right now with the gas prices, let alone higher taxes. Because right now, for those who aren't aware, we're at like 34, 40% tax rates. If we're talking state, local, and federal. If we add them all up, we're around 34 to 35% total. Would you guys be okay with 50%, 55%, 60%? That's where we start to go, oh,
Either way, it's not like even with education, if it was free education, it wouldn't actually.
yeah, I like
be
the free. Yeah.
Mhm.
Because again, this is like the world of would it be nice to have a free college education? That'd be great. But will professors, let alone janitors and maintenance people at the schools, work for free? No, they're going to want salary. Right? So how much are we willing to give up to get? Right? And then the question is, how much is too much? Right? And this is where we get into mixed economics. We talk Democrat, we talk Republican. There is going to be a difference between how much they're willing to pay for certain things, because there are certain goals in each party's. I mean, we look at more social stuff for the Democrat Party, and look at more independent stuff for the Republican Party. So you run into social programs versus independent programs. So, but again, we're in the mixed economic systems here. All right. Look at this. That lovely thing in the middle has shown its ugly face. The world we live in, right? So the households and the firms are still the same. Those are still existing. See how complicated it gets now that we've added taxes in there. Right? Product market and factor market are still also there. But now, government. We add that lovely thing. And I've said this many, many years. There's a part of me that wishes I had an interactive flow model of where I could like make the government really, really small and make the households and factories get bigger, and then make the government really, really big and make the households and factories get really small. Like there's this like dynamic to this where you can really see how the impact it can have on you depending on the size of the government, right? Because then all of a sudden, like for me, I am technically a government employee, so I am a household, right? And I am going to provide my services to the government, right? The government is going to pay me for it, so I get pay. But then look at what happens here. I get my pay. I still have to pay them taxes. So even though I work for the government, I still pay taxes. There are some things I do together that are tax exempt. So, like if I were to go on a trip for school purposes, I can exempt those miles because it's for school stuff. If I buy something for the school, they can get it for tax exemption. I don't have to pay taxes. Now you guys right here, your households, you guys are providing or going out and buying stuff, right? And then those companies, in order to keep those companies, will then pay taxes from the stuff they get to the government. But the government plows the roads, takes the garbage away, provides sewage, provides the water. Like my lovely bills I get every year, let's see, or every month, and my Cleveland water bill. I have my sanitation bill and then I have a bill from Brunswick. So there's a Brunswick, there's my water, um, and then those are the three major services I get from Medina County. Right. So again, we had all of that lovely stuff, and we add. Right now, the other thing to keep in mind, this is kind of a silly one, but the government also has to purchase things, right? So if the government needs toilet paper for their buildings, well, they're going to give the money to the firms, and the firm's going to give them those items, right? So there's still think about all the planes and all the boats that we build, right? We have to buy those from companies, and companies give it to us back. Now, one of the things that we look at, and I argue with this little spectrum here in regards to U.S. and Canada. I think the U.S. is a little bit more to the right of Canada, right? But this is relatively generic. The two that are really on the extremes here, and we already talked about one, was North Korea, and The opposite of that, if we're looking at the most free economic system, Singapore. Matter of fact, I showed you guys that little clip from Facebook, the movie Social Media, and I can't remember his name now. Does anybody remember the name of the guy that used to help be part owner of Facebook? I can't think of his name now. Andrew Garfield played him in the movie. He actually, in real life, denounced his U.S. citizenship. Is no longer a U.S. citizen. Is now a citizen of Singapore. Partly because it's such a free market system. Like he thought there was too many limitations and issues in the U.S., and so he left the U.S. and became a full-fledged Singapore citizen. So you run into very, very much a disparity between the two. There's a better image I'll show you guys in a minute here. All right. Now, this is one of those things where we run into the propaganda, right? Heavy government involvement. This would have been that spectrum where the government was really, really big and the firms and the people were really, really small. North Korea, we've talked about this already, extremely, extremely controlling. There's actually a study I found. The government controls so much of what they do and the food that they can eat. North Koreans are, on average, 10 to 20 pounds lighter than South Koreans and 1 to 2 inches smaller than South Koreans. And they really aren't that tall in the first place, partly because of the nutrition, because the government limits so much of what they have. They really, really limit who they can work with outside of, like, they'll work with China and they might work with Russia, but they really don't do a lot of trading outside of because they're so isolated, so closed off. And they also look at the U.S. and other countries as their enemies. And I'll show you some propaganda here in a second. China. So I made these slides a couple years back. I will tell you that the loosening grip on total control is actually going the opposite direction now. You're starting to see a lot more control regarding the economy and what people could do. Like Hong Kong, who here has heard of all the different stuff happening in Hong Kong with the government kind of taking over? Anybody remember a couple years back they had during the protest, the left eye or one of the eyes was covered up. One of the girls in the protest had her eye she lost her eye in one of the protests, so that became kind of like their fight against the tyrannical Chinese government. So the Chinese government is actually taking a lot more control and controlling a lot more stuff and taking a lot more freedoms away recently, probably the past 2 or 3 years.
So Russia at like one point the red right hand or something like that.
Yep. Yeah. So this is a video that was taken or made by the North Koreans. I'll show you guys in a second. Then we jump to the other side of the aisle. Right? So now you run into Singapore. This one tends to be one of the more free cities, free city states, I should say. It's kind of like New York. Imagine New York City being its own country. That would be Singapore. Singapore is I'll actually show you guys on a map. It's easier. But they have a lot more freedoms. They still do have some strict laws. So the other thing too is how they punish you in Singapore is a lot more strict than in the U.S. even. You tend to avoid getting caught by the police, or you just don't do anything, or you do very little to avoid. So real quick, I want to show you guys, God bless you, Singapore. So if I back off here, that was pretty far. Right. Let's try this again. Right, so Indonesia, you got Australia. By the way, this is North Korea, South Korea, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia is right in here. And you come down here, this island / city. So you can see how it's there's a waterway around it. That's Singapore. Right? So one of the things that's easy for Singapore is it is smaller than the U.S. So their crime rate, super, super, super low. But then again, when I show you guys this video on how they punish people, it'll give you a little more explanation as to why they have less crime there. Um, they still do have limitations on, like, drugs is one of the big ones, which I'll show you guys here in a second. Um, child trafficking, sex trafficking stuff, that's of course very, very serious as well. But there are things over there that good to go. I mean, you want to do, like, the prostitution over in Singapore is just part of the commerce. It's what you do. It's allowed. I'm not sure about how much regulations they have on it, but the other thing too, and this is actually something that we'll talk about. The next slide is we won't get to it today. Is culture and economics. There's a correlation or a similarity between the two.